All right, everybody good? Ready to go? All right. Thanks for coming to Billion Bits. Today, actually, we have a special format. I guess we won't make it so special that we don't make the announcements or anything like that. So, who's first time at Billion Bits today? Okay, a couple folks. Very good. So, Billion Bits is a meetup that was kind of created to get a bit of more of a technical conversation around gigabit and gigabit applications. And the idea is when the rollout of Google Fiber and a couple other things, network technology started to happen, there wasn't a lot of technical discussion around those topics. And so Billion Bits was kind of started to foster some of that. And we kind of broke that conversation into evolution of the network. So how's the network changing? Software frameworks and approaches. So what are some of the software tools and things that people are doing to actually implement applications? Proliferation, computing, and algorithms, which is what the talk is today, although it could be evolution of the network. Then we've added Internet of Things embedded computing section, and then ultimately we want to have applications where all of those things intersect. We've had some where two of those things intersected, and at some point we'll get to flying drones with face recognition, computer vision in the cloud, where everything is, we're not quite there yet, but soon. The other part of it is that it's kind of a community meetup, so any announcements, anything going on, hackathons, other events, things like that, all ears, always happy to open up the floor and get some announcements going. So if anybody has any upcoming events or anything like that, we can go through those really quickly. In fact, actually, you know what? Since we got two speakers online, let's hold off on that, and we'll do the talk first, then do the discussion later. That way we can kind of free up some time for Q&A and discussion. Today we have a really interesting talk. We have Ashley Hatch from Google to talk about the infrastructure of gigabit and actually how is some of the topology of the network and how's the network structured. It's a talk that we've been pushing for a long time, and finally we get an interesting perspective on that and get to see kind of what does the infrastructure actually look like. I'm pretty excited about it. Hopefully the rest of you guys are excited and gals are excited about this a little bit as well. Following Ashley's talk, we're going to have Colin from Shinra talk about the really interesting data center-based video game platform that they're demoing here in Kansas City. And they're actually doing some really interesting things where he'll talk about how some of the infrastructure, both the network and the data center, are being used to deliver some interesting applications in video gaming. And the format's a little different today because we'll have Ashley go, then we'll have Colin go, and then we'll have 20 minutes of combined Q&A. And so hopefully we'll have a little bit of kind of give and take in a discussion. We're pretty excited about that. So without further ado, and in respect of everybody else's time, I think we'll get Ashley to kind of give us the talk and get started. And Ashley, maybe if you can, we see the presentation almost full screen. You know what? That's probably good enough. We can see that. If there's a way to get it more full screen, that'd be great. But otherwise, we see it.
Yeah, it's a little tough because I have to keep my speaker notes up. It won't let me full screen and keep my speaker notes up.
That makes perfect sense. Then you're good to go. Then
actually, let me try a trick here.
Yeah, that's better. Great.
There you go. Yeah, I was able to get it to cooperate with me. Okay.
Awesome.
Okay, guys. So my name is Ashley Hatch. I'm a network architect at Google Fiber. I've been here for a couple of years, so I haven't been here since the beginning, but I've been here for a good majority of it. So today we are a little bit particular about revealing details about the topology, the equipment, so I can talk in a high level. But I targeted this at kind of how a general ISP does peering and how we get bits into the network and how we facilitate high capacity, low latency to give benefit to services like gaming or content delivery or media. So thanks for inviting me out, and hopefully you guys will find this interesting. I'm assuming everyone here isn't a peering coordinator, so hopefully some of these will be some new topics for you guys.
You're safe.
Okay. So what I'm going to talk about today is about peering. And peering is critically important to providing a gigabit experience. So I think everyone can accept that we do gigabit in the access layer. You have a CPE stack in your house that gives you a gigabit service. But that's really half of the equation. Getting you, access to uncontested bandwidth at providers is the other half, and that is a rich topic that requires a lot of details. So I'm going to go over the different types of peerings that general ISPs use, and we do use all of these types. I can't talk about the specific companies we use or which peering, which content distribution networks we use, which private peerings or public peerings due to contractual issues, but you can infer a lot from previous statements that Google has made and people have found out about us. I can confirm or neither confirm or deny those concepts, but they're all generally you can figure them out if you're very interested. So I'm going to talk about there's really 4 different types of ways that we get bits to you guys. Everyone's familiar with services like Akamai. YouTube has their distribution networks. Google has their distribution networks for YouTube. And those are servers that are located out on the network. We'll talk about that. There's what we call peering fabrics, which are available in different cities, and I'll talk about that more. We call that public peering, where we openly peer with people that organizations that want to, that would save us from having to spend money on paying to go through third-party providers. Then there's private peering relationships that we use for more critical infrastructure or higher bandwidth. Perhaps we might even have to pay for that, or they might have to pay. Though no one pays us, though. I think people are pretty familiar with the YouTube relationships with Comcast that happened in the last couple of years, and we can talk a little bit about that as well. And finally, there's the ISP peering, which is not peering in the sense of these public and private peerings, which mean that we're not actually allowing each other to transit traffic through them, but we're only talking to them specifically. Transit is how we get actually access to anything on the internet in general. All of these peerings, the term peering really comes from BGP peering, and if you're a networking geek, obviously you're familiar with BGP. So let's go ahead and jump into it. This graph that I have here, this image is just a representation of what peering looks like on the internet between all of the different organizations on the internet all over the world, and sort of the Kevin Bacon 3 degrees of separation is this how many interconnects do you have to go through to get to any other point, and this is kind of just a visualization of that. So peering is at the fundamental level is how we get bits from other networks, from other organizations, and BGP is the heart of that system, is the internet's overall inter-site connectivity protocol. Primarily what we do with BGP is we get access to resources from other networks, and they get access to our subscribers. The first and most important thing is that we actually get you access to anything that you want to get access to. In order to do that, we usually do that through Tier 1, and I said peering here, but really we call that transit. We go to a company, just to name some of the types, I can't say which ones we use, Level 3, Hurricane Electric, EXO, TINet. These are Tier 1 providers that generally, if you connect to them, they'll connect you to anyone else you need to get connected to. Secondary goals, beyond just getting you there, is we want to minimize your latency so that you're not, if you're on a gaming server, that you're not up in the 50 or 100 millisecond range, because you're starting in Kansas and going to LA and then coming back to Kansas to talk to your neighbor, right? We also want to maximize the bandwidth by not having to haul it across the country. If we have to haul it across the country, that means we have to spend more money on really long-haul, high-speed links. That's going to be prohibitive. So while we struggle and fight very hard to make sure we have enough bandwidth, we try to do it more intelligently than just piping bandwidth into these long-distance links. And lastly, if we can reduce the cost of the network, then we can build to more people and we can provide a higher level of service. So that's sort of the last thing, but we really focus on the others first. And lastly, the ways we provide those other things, the minimizing of latency, the bandwidth, and reducing the cost is through things like CDNs and public and private peering. Let's see, next there. So from a sense in the room, people familiar with the CDN networks that I mentioned, like Akamai, Google's, or Netflix's Open Connect infrastructure?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, so this is a really, you've probably also seen some providers do allow CDNs to co-locate in their facilities and other vendors do not. That's really up to the individual ISP. There's massive benefits to the subscriber to provide CDN resources. Now, let me be specific. CDNs do not have to be co-located in an ISP's facility or in our facility. They can exist out in the network in relation to just being distributed networks, and then you would get to them through your tier 1 provider, and hopefully they're close to you, but you can't really guarantee that they're going to give you the bandwidth that you want, and you're limited to the amount of bandwidth you have to your tier 1 provider. So when I'm talking about CDN, I'm talking about what happens when you bring the CDN into your own ISP data centers for delivery into the local metro networks, reducing latency as much as possible and maximizing the total bandwidth. Typically, that's going to mean that you're going to have to provide co-location space, you're going to have to provide power. Depending on the relationships, some ISPs make content providers pay for that. Other ISPs do that settlement free, thinking that it's a benefit to the subscribers. We tend to be in the second camp. We like to co-locate services because ultimately it's in our best interest. We're a network provider. We're a gigabit provider. We're excited about gigabit the same way you guys are excited about gigabit. So we're not thinking that companies like Voodoo, YouTube, Hulu, that they're competing with us. They're providing services to our customers. So by co-locating those in our data centers, we're giving you a better service, and we're making it more likely that you'll enjoy the service that we give you. So from our perspective, co-location of CDN services is a good thing. You can look here on the wiki article that I've linked, and I can make this presentation available via PDF for people that want to have it. For the ideas of the kinds of CDNs we have some subset of the CDNs listed there. And I apologize for being cagey. It's sort of a googly type thing. We like to be very open, but we're pretty strict on what we can make public. Secondarily, we have what we call public peerings. Public peerings can be either local to a metro area like Kansas, or they could be done at large carrier hotels nationally. If they're done at national peering points, they're done to make it so that we just don't have to pay a tier 1 provider to get us bandwidth. It's not really going to increase our bandwidth profile. It's not going to get more bits to you, but it's going to lower the cost of the network for us. Typically, what we like to do in all of our metros, and in all the metros we've built so far, we do have peering fabrics, at least private peering. In Kansas City, I do not believe we are connected to a public peering, but we are connected to private peering, which lets us connect to content providers and large ISP, not necessarily ISPs, but large content providers or other service providers, so that you have very close adjacency to services being provided in your area to reduce your latency further. Peering fabrics are interesting in that normally when you peer, the classic peering was you had to have your router connected to a remote router. You had an eBGP relationship with them over that point-to-point link, and every peer that you wanted to connect to, you had to have a physical fiber connect to them. A lot of these large carrier hotels have provided things like Equinix or Telehouse Telecity provide peering fabrics where you connect a single interface into the peering fabric, and then there's a large 10 gig, or it used to be 1 gig, typically they're 10 gig now, 10 gig, hundreds of ports of 10 gig switching into a large layer 2 domain in which you can optionally peer directly to as many hosts as you want within the bandwidth profile of that interface that you've connected to the peering fabric with. Another way that you can get connected to that peering fabric is if you just want to peer with everyone that shows up in that peering fabric automatically, typically there can be a route reflector inside of that peering fabric. You peer with that route reflector with BGP, everyone else peers with it, and then you automatically get the connectivity to all those other hosts. There's security implications and scaling implications, but as long as you have good policies in place, that's a good way to get access to all of the local resources that POP provides without having to individually set up relationships with all the other providers. The last type of peering I want to talk about is private peering. Private peering is a little bit of a sticky topic, and this is the things where net neutrality comes in, and where we have seen news articles about Netflix and Comcast, is when the bandwidth of a private peer, of a public peer isn't enough, or I don't want to participate in public peering, and my tier 1 links are being saturated by some sort of resource, or I'm not able to do a bandwidth guarantee to a service, I might go to another provider or service or company and say, how about we have a direct relationship between each other? It'll benefit both of our customers or both of our service subscriber bases, and it'll provide us a guaranteed service that we can control, we can scale to our needs in between us. Those can be co-located in the same carrier hotel. Even if you're in the same metro, or even if you're on a national level, you can also transport those to one another and have that direct point-to-point relationship. Sometimes those are paid, sometimes those are settlement-free. Again, these are complications that come in with who's providing the traffic, who's making money off of the traffic. Google Fiber, thankfully, in my perspective, is open about these. We never charge anyone, though we do have to pay other people for some of our peering. Lastly, we have to have a catch-all. The peering only gets us access to remote networks. An important thing to know about peering is when I say peering, a CDN, for example, is not exactly a peer, but it's a way to get content at high bandwidth and low latency. That's not really getting me access to another network. It's just giving me access to servers with content. Public and private peering give me access to other companies' networks, but only their networks. I'm not allowed to go through a peer to get to a network that's beyond them. Sometimes you'll see that kind of thing, but then you're really using them as transit. And when you go on these peering fabrics, for example, you have to put in protections to make sure that someone doesn't try to use you as a peering transit, because then they're getting free transit that normally they'd have to pay pretty high price per bit in order to get. So you do have to have consciousness to not allow you to transit others, and you have to try to make sure you don't accidentally transit others, and that gets into BGP policy. The last thing you need is this connection to really highly connected tier 1 providers, like I mentioned, so that you're connected to them at multiple points across your geography, so that if a site goes down or a provider goes down, you still have access to the entire internet, because peering is going to give you access to, even if you aggressively peer, you can't get access to more than 10-15% of the internet. You need to have that catch-all that gets you access to everything. We actually have connections to 3 or more, depending on the time, tier 1 providers, so that even if the entire provider's down, we still can get access to anywhere on the internet with a high degree of connectivity. This, of course, is the most expensive, because in peering, usually you're going to pay, if you're on a peering fabric, you're going to pay a small connect fee, but it's not going to be by the bit. It's going to be by the circuit. When you do tier 1, you're going to pay for every bit that you transfer up to your bandwidth profile. Is it 10 gig? Is it 100 gig? Whatever your profiles per month. If you go over your commitments, then you have to pay more. So you want to minimize the amount you spend on tier 1, because it is the most expensive version of everything. So just briefly, we have to have national peering. National peering versus regional peering, those are a little bit different than private peering and public peering versus tier 1 peering. Is we have to have these national pop points, because if we want to go to providers and services that are not at our peering points, we have to be able to get to things that are in an arbitrary location geographically. So everyone meets up in very common sites, and I'm actually going to talk about some of those sites in an adjacent slide. But we have to go to these common national peering points so that we can make sure we have connectivity to any service, because like I said, we can peer locally with things, but when we go nationally, we can still peer with a lot of big providers, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, so that we can still get a reduced cost and higher bandwidth without having to peer with them in each metro market, which they may or may not be in. Though we do want to maximize the regional peering so that we give you the lowest latency. It's cheaper for us, so it's easier for us to justify giving lots of bandwidth, and we are only limited by the fact that our peer is locally available. It's also overhead that we can't, obviously, there's 50,000 different autonomous networks on BGP right now, and we can't have a relationship with all of them. So we do have to have some discrimination on who we peer with, and is it justify the operational overhead. It's not really a cost in terms of we want to charge money for them, but there are interface limitations, there are operational considerations. So regional peering and massive arbitrary peering isn't going to be available to us. So in relation to this, the gaming talk that we're going to have next from Shinra, I did want to talk a little bit about latency and sort of what you can kind of expect out of the optimization, which I see for most services. For example, if you were to access, I say Netflix a lot. Let's face it, Netflix is about 50% of the internet, so that's a fair assumption of what you're doing with your internet from a bits perspective at any given time. You can get that from almost anywhere because the latency isn't going to limit you. But when it comes to something like gaming, latency is going to be a big deal. So this is an example of where we peer on a national level. We have sites in all of the POPs. Now, let me be very clear. This doesn't indicate sites where we're planning to build gigabit cities. This is actually sites where we peer to receive internet traffic. Now, some of those overlap. Austin, Kansas City, Provo are sites where we've built. So we've located, those aren't generally going to be sites that are going to be filled with lots of content providers or large-scale service providers, but we do want to have peering points there so we can locally connect to resources in the area to again, give you that latency benefit. LAX, ORD, IAD, LGA, DFW are all massive internet connectivity points where anyone in the region has to go to them to get bandwidth. So if you're a company like Rackspace, for example, where I used to work, you have to peer at DFW because that's who supplies Texas with most of their bandwidth. Similarly, LAX and IAD are those really dense service provider where we connect with both tier 1 providers and very large-scale content provider peers. I'll talk more specifically about what goes on inside of MCI, Kansas City. Hopefully everyone recognizes, I saw a news report that people didn't recognize the United States on a map. There was a beauty contestant talked about it. So this is the United States for anyone that had missed it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the latency implications of if we only did national peerings, how that might impact you. So, and hopefully this isn't something people are overly familiar with. Hopefully it's educational to some of you. If I was going to have access to a gaming server, for example, and I lived in Kansas City and it was located in San Jose, that's approximately 22,000 kilometers or 2,200 kilometers. And if you just by the speed of light inside of glass, which is 120,000 kilometers per second, that's 22 milliseconds round trip if I was able to shoot that without the curvature of Earth, if I didn't have to go around mountains or roads or obstructions, and I didn't have to go through any networking equipment. When you add in the indirection of the route and the length and the individual equipment latencies that every networking piece of equipment you go through is going to increase that, though really it's the speed of light that's going to dominate, and the speed of light and the length of the path is going to dominate your round trip time. You're looking at 40 milliseconds to go back and forth if the host that you're trying to communicate with was inside of San Jose. If that host happened to be in Washington or in Oregon, you'd have to add another 5-10 milliseconds onto that round trip. So even something as close as DFW is still about 10 milliseconds in a real case distance between Kansas City and DFW from a round trip perspective. And when you're getting into Call of Duty battles, getting into the even tens of milliseconds is problematic. And I think it's going to be even more interesting in the Shinra case. If we go into a regional peering where we have co-located, and I'm making the assumption here that I've co-located services, either CDN nodes, or I've done direct peering with a service provider inside of the market, the latencies that you can expect from any point in the city to any other point in the city are always going to be sub 1 millisecond from a speed of light travel time. Certainly, we're going to expect there's going to be server processing. There's going to be more impact from the network elements, queuing, switching speeds, but usually those are in the microseconds. So even if you go through dozens of those, that's going to add tens to hundreds of microseconds. But you should still be sub millisecond from a networking perspective. But you'll see higher than 1 millisecond ping times or round trip times due to server processing and actually creating the physics and the responses to input packets. Um, that's really my talk. I really wish I could have been more specific. I may be able to get permission to do more of the topology or how the network is designed, but I wanted to at least talk about how we get the bits to you and how that impacts services like Shinra in particular, because I think that's where we're going to see the most innovation. Is gigabit is one thing, being able to get bits to you fast, but interactive bits I think are going to be the most interesting. If you have questions or you would like to be a peer, you'd like to know more about our peering policy, you can get to us at peering@googlefiber.net. And if you want to know more about exactly how we build things, we have lots of job openings, and we can tell you all about them once you work here.
Nice. Thanks, Ashley. I guess one quick question before we transfer over to Colin. How has kind of the peering latency bandwidth picture changed over the last, let's say, 5 years, and kind of where do you see it going? Maybe a couple quick thoughts, and maybe we'll dig into that in Q&A a little bit more.
Sure. The biggest thing is there is more of a push to have large CDNs. It's becoming more of a question. I think the biggest thing is there's a regulatory constraints being put on it. Obviously, net neutrality is a big deal, and it relates to how you can discriminate between peers. And we're going to see more and more of the large providers that have been reluctant to provide peering are going to have to provide a more uniform response to that. So we are probably not going to be as affected as most people because we have a very open peering policy. We are aggressive in pursuing peering relationships that will improve our customer experience. I hope my battery's not getting ready to die. Okay, I got a little bit more. But I think you'll see larger pushes of CDN nodes to inside of ISPs or near ISPs, and hopefully net neutrality is going to push the other large providers to providing less contentious, higher bandwidth connections without having to go through so much of a rigmarole. I mean, it's been a real point of contention here to see the fights over peering when it makes sense to peer. So I think hopefully these regulatory issues will help free that up.
Okay, cool. Hopefully we'll be able to stick around for the Q&A part. I'm going to switch over to Colin
Sure.
to talk on what Shinra is up to here in Kansas City with their video game demonstration. Colin, you with us?
Yes, I am. Can you hear me?
We can. And the presentation looks good.
Great. Okay, Ashley, thanks so much for presenting that. I'm kind of going to get into the kind of the bits and pieces of how we're going to be taking advantage of services like Google Fiber for gaming and streaming some video games, hopefully starting this summer. So I myself I'm a very old school video game guy. I kind of grew up in the Tokyo game industry and then moved back to the States a couple years ago to work on some indie titles. Before that, I was at a company called Square Enix and shipped quite a few Final Fantasy games that I've heard that the kids are really all into, but I wouldn't know. So basically, Shinra we're a brand new cloud gaming platform. We are a subsidiary of Square Enix in Tokyo. We're headquartered in New York City, and all of our technology comes from a bunch of really smart guys up in Montreal. So what we are is we're a high workload cloud. So if you're unfamiliar on how that works, this basically means we take the player's controller input, we send it across the internet. We do all of our gameplay calculations, rendering, AI, and sound, all up in the cloud. And then we send it back to the player via streaming video. And we have to do this very, very, very quickly. If you think this sounds familiar to OnLive or PlayStation Now, which are other streaming services, you'd be correct. But our technology and what we're actually aiming to do with the platform are very, very different. That's because we're not aiming to do the console in the cloud. What I mean by that is we're not looking to take existing titles that would run on a typical console, and just kind of shift them 500 miles into a data center. We're looking to do things that are a lot more interesting and take advantage of a really unique architecture. So we all use Netflix and Amazon as in video, and we know why streaming is great. And you have every right to make fun of me and my substantial Blu-ray collection. But all these conveniences that we enjoy from streaming completely pass on to the gaming side. We can have a thin client that runs on pretty much anything. Because we're a streaming game company, we don't have to sell hardware. We'll put on any box with a controller. We're kind of skipping mobile for now because we don't really want people to be playing these action games that require a controller with 20 buttons on a touchscreen phone. So we can run it on pretty much anything. If you set it up correctly, there are no load times. Downloading and patching are done server side, so you never have to see that loading bar. Hacking and cheating are kind of a thing of the past if everybody's playing on the machines in the data center. And I won't say piracy is impossible, because piracy always finds a way, but it's going to be very, very hard, and we'll offer some new challenges. So the best part is that the public is very accepting of the cloud. We turn to the cloud for music and books and TV. Games are not quite there yet. We're kind of halfway there. And for games, the cloud is basically there as a big repository so that we can throw large amounts of data to every client box. So we can hold your save data, in case you spill Kool-Aid on your console. But we're seeing, more and more calculations that are getting offloaded to the server these days. A lot of mobile and free-to-play games. They're kind of aggressively handling things on the server side. And that's why we kind of think that the move of all calculations to the cloud, most specifically remote rendering, is pretty much inevitable. Again, the good news is that with services like Google Fiber and in towns like Kansas City, the infrastructure has caught up for this kind of thing. So the elephant in the room that everybody wants to talk about is latency. So I kind of want to talk about it and how we kind of work around the speed of light. We think that streaming has kind of gotten a bum rap since its inception, because no matter how fast we can calculate things on the server, streaming games are always going to be a slave to the user's ISP. For example, my boss Jacob, he lives in Manhattan. He has fiber. It's just obscenely fast. Then my dad, he lives in Amish County in Pennsylvania, and he gets maybe 3 megabit downstream. I mean, my phone is faster than that at this point. So Jacob, my boss, is going to think streaming games are awesome. And my dad is not going to understand why he's getting a bad experience. He doesn't know if it's Lancaster County's bad DSL. Is it Shinra's fault? He doesn't know. And so what we have to do is we're going to have to enforce a quality bar. And what we mean by that is we don't want to have any substandard experiences. So initially, the Shinra platform is only going to be available for fiber subscribers. And to deal with that, we're partnering with a number of infrastructure partners. We have already run a beta in Tokyo, and I'm happy to say that we are going to be running a technical beta in Kansas City for all subscribers to Google Fiber or Gigabit Ethernet. And at the end, I'm going to give you the URL where you can sign up and check it out for yourself. So again, this is a long game. We're not going to be able to cover the entire USA in a year, just because fiber, adoption rates are still low. But we want to be the first to move, and there's a couple things that we have to do. The first thing we have to do is we have to make really cool games, and the second part of it is we need to make it actually make sense from a business perspective. So the dude in charge. His name is Iwasaki-san, and Iwasaki-san is here to build the future, and he's not necessarily here to wear a suit. He's incapable of saying no. He has done the impossible for a number of game companies before. And 5 years ago, our CEO asked if he could figure out a way to make cloud gaming work by using some supercomputers in the data center. And he was like, yeah, sure. So this kind of brings us to the fun part when we get to figure out what a supercomputer actually is. The Japanese K computer is a really good example. So let me look at my notes here. The K computer is a collection of 80,000 SPARC 64 processors linked together in a 6-dimensional torus interconnect that is code named Tofu. Now, in actuality, there's no decent definition of what actually makes a supercomputer, aside from a collection of a massive number of processors that are all kind of churning in tandem. The question that we had to ask is how do they play games? Now, this supercomputer only plays tic-tac-toe, so it's kind of a wash. Moving on. There's a neat site called Top 500, and this has got the highest powered supercomputers in the world. And we kind of figured that this was as good a place as any to start looking. These are the top 10. And you'll notice that we're seeing specialized CPUs like Spark 64 and Power, but a number of these, including the number one, the Tianhe 2, they're all based on Intel Xeon technology. And, that's just traditional x86-based architecture. And, we know that. We love that. Well, we put up with it. But we're also seeing, coprocessor technology like Xeon Phi, and, that's an evolution of Larrabee architecture. And we also see stuff like, NVIDIA's Tesla boards with Kepler technology. And what those are essentially, souped-up versions of the GPUs that are in, gaming PCs and in game consoles. So we're seeing the trend of general purpose processors being put to use. Probably about 85, 86% of the top 500 are on Intel. We're guessing that the majority of those are Xeon. We don't have the exact numbers. And Amazon's EC2, that's also a supercomputer. But what really inspired us was this system that's called the Dejima. And it's kind of like your computer at home where you stick 2 video cards in and get the extra power boost, but just kind of taken to ridiculous extremes. It has the world's, obviously you can see by the center of this picture, it has the world's most advanced cooling system. It was built by a guy named Hamada-san at the Nagasaki Advanced Computing Center. It's got a number of, just off-the-shelf NVIDIA GPUs, and it was, combined into a research supercomputer cluster. So they started really small with, a mere 32 GPUs, and then they just kept buying more and more and more. And they wound up with a supercomputer that was rocking 158 teraflops. It also turned out to be incredibly cost efficient, and it won a Gordon Bell Prize for price performance. So it was really cheap, $400,000. The greenest supercomputer for a while. Professor Hamada swapped out the interconnect to InfiniBand later just for fun and got an extra perf boost. And we saw this, and Iwasaki-san had thought that, if the cost of supercomputing can be driven this low, why wouldn't we be using this for games? And that's kind of how we wound up with our cloud gaming architecture. So, this is great. We've got render and compute in the cloud, and we're able to execute on architectures that we're familiar with, like x86 and standard GPUs. The question is, can we really afford to give one user a $400,000 supercomputer? Now, the answer is no. But the question that we have to ask afterwards is how do we actually make this cost effective? Server hardware is not cheap, and as much as we would like to grab a bunch of used NVIDIA boards and stick them in a closet, we need to use enterprise grade hardware in a data center, and we need to use it efficiently. So when we use PCs and consoles at home, we're not using them 24/7 because there's a ton of downtime. We need to make sure that we're using that downtime. I mean, it's not that we don't just want to have a bunch of processors idling, but we want all of our processors running as close to 100% all the time, so we get our money's worth. So if we have 5 glasses that are 80% full, that means that we have one completely empty glass, and that is no good. So I was saying that we don't want to do console in the cloud, and here is why. A lot of the architectures out there, they make virtual machines where every user is getting one or multiple assigned CPUs or GPUs, and for that reason, they have all the inefficiencies of that model, where your CPU is waiting for the GPU to catch up and vice versa. And because of these inefficiencies, that turns into a very, very high cost per user. So this is what we're looking at for a typical DirectX game. The CPU and the GPU, they're not being maxed out. For a box under your TV, that's okay. But for a cloud-based virtual machine, those gaps are completely lost efficiency and lost money for us. So what we've got to do is we've got to maximize the CPU and the GPU at all times. And our solution for that was we decided to separate the CPU from the GPU. And we're essentially creating a sharing economy for supercomputer games. So once our technology splits the CPU from the GPU, we're able to balance it across potentially dozens of users on a single CPU server, and dozens more on a single GPU server. And the more players that we add, the more we scale. And at the end, it becomes possible to basically share a supercomputer among players in such a way that the costs work out. So our goal at the beginning was to make sure that you could take a DirectX game and run it remotely, and render it on one of on our platform without actually having to rebuild the game. So you know how it works with the local console. You basically have the game and it talks to the EXE. The EXE speaks to the video card, and the video card spits out a frame for your monitor. When you render remotely, it's pretty much the same path, except it's going over the internet and the video is coming back as a stream. But with our system, once we receive the player input, we pull out the rendering commands and we send it basically over a very high-speed interconnect into a special rendering server. And the way that we do it is we fake it out. We implement fake Microsoft DLLs. And what they do is they take the rendering commands that are typically sent to the video card, but what we actually do is we shuttle them off over the interconnect into a standalone renderer on a separate PC. So a benefit of this is if you run the game standalone on one of our supercomputer racks, we're averaging about 9 milliseconds per frame for all the calculation. Now, if we run the game under the Shinra architecture, we cut that down to 4.4. Okay, now how is that possible? The trick is that the protocol is going to let us do more async calls and keep data in memory, where DirectX doesn't usually let you do that. We're also caching the results of operations that occur in other instances. So basically, when we run at scale, we can get about double the players into a single configuration than if you were running it traditionally. So if a lot of people are going to be playing a game like Deus Ex, we want to make sure that they're all running on the same server, and that means you're going to be, you can pull all of your textures out of the same texture memory, which gets very expensive. So here's an earlier demo where we are running 57 game instances on a single server PC. Each of these screens is a GPU, and this is a server machine with 4 Quadro K5000s, and this is very old. This is back from, I believe, 2011 or 2012. So things have only gotten much faster from that point. So in terms of taking older games, it's very easy for us to take old stuff and just kind of put it up on our supercomputer, game server clusters, which means that you can run a standard Windows game on Shinra very easily, but that's not the cool part of what we're doing. So the way our architecture works, it kind of leads us to this really fascinating break in design, and what we're calling this is supercomputer multiplayer. So if you play games, you're probably aware of how we have to divide, subdivide, and create instances of multiplayer game worlds, and how a lot of things need to remain static when you crank up the player count. So something that our R&D department has been looking to is game worlds on a massive and dynamic scale. So what you're looking at here is what we're most excited about. This is called one-to-N architecture. In this case, we basically have one supercomputer that handles all the calculations for a single multiplayer game instance. So we can have a game world of just like amazing fidelity that can also happen to be extremely dynamic. So every player, isn't running that on a local machine. Everything and all player actions are taking place on one supermicro, and every user is essentially a viewport. So think of you have a gigantic game level, and you're just opening a FaceTime into that level, so you can see what's going on. The way it works is we use a single instance of the game engine. All the players are interacting in the same world. Physics and AI, they're shared across all the users, so you're only calculating it once. So if you think of like a split-screen game, like a Halo or a Mario Kart, it's exactly that, except on a much larger scale. So the real cool takeaway from this is the fact that you don't need to write intensive multiplayer code anymore. Having to take your game and then have all of the actions pass through a single network connection, that is the bottleneck for whenever you make a game. I've worked on a ton of games where we wanted to make multiplayer versions, but the amount of stuff we had to synchronize between 32 players, there was simply too much data to throw over the pipe. and get everything synchronized. So anyway, that's good because with our system, you don't need to synchronize the game and the world state across clients. And some people are doing cloud-based simulation as just kind of like extra, an extra layer of graphics. But what we're bringing is not just the graphics, but we're also building the ability to actually have those those massive calculations have meaning on the gameplay. We can break a building into a couple thousand pieces, and each of those pieces can actually have physics and affect players in the world, as opposed to other games where a building would explode and then it would just kind of fade out, or you could just like walk through the rubble with there was no collision on it. So we're looking for we think supercomputer gaming is not just about the aesthetics, it's about the interaction. It's just very easy for us to change the world and not have it reset. So basically, the game developer's dilemma is that you've got one CPU, you have one GPU, and you've got to divide it all up. So you're presumably going to run on everything down to the cheapest, netbook with Intel integrated graphics that's running on Windows XP with no service packs, and that basically that is your pie. Where we make things interesting is that we're able to essentially give you more pies as you wish. So because of the distributed architecture that we have, we can add new hardware as we see fit. For example, we can do physics. We can offload physics to a separate server. AI. We're working with a company in England called Kythera, and they are doing a system with us that's doing artificial intelligence on a much larger scale than anything that's been attempted before, just because we're able to give them so much, so many compute cycles on a GPU to calculate. I think that AI has really gotten the short end of the stick for the last 15 years, and there really hasn't been enough CPU to dedicate to making a smarter AI. But I think that's going to change with one of the prototypes that we're currently working on. So I have a demo here. I may need confirmation. Can you guys see what is on my screen right now?
Yeah.
Fantastic. Okay, so what we're looking at right here, this is called our living world demo, and what you are looking at right here is a single instance of the game, and we are running a total of 64 players inside this at once. So we have one game world, and for this demo, we're just going to have 4 players running. This demo will be available during the Shinra technical beta. That's going to be starting later this summer, so you can jump in and check it out. So what are you looking at right here? Why is this interesting? This is a area that is 16 by 16 square kilometers. There are over, I believe there are a total of 1 million trees inside this area. And unlike a game like Skyrim or World of Warcraft, there's no load time. Because the entire world is in memory. There's no streaming, so you can basically just blast across the map at full speed, and you never have to wait for the rest of the world to load in. Okay, so that's interesting. We can do a gigantic world. So here's an example of doing massive AI. In the upper windows, you can see that we're able to fly through these these clouds, and these are not particle clouds. These are actually separate AI. Running for a total of 16,000 dragons inside the world. So yeah, there you go. You've got massive AI to go with that. So what else can you do? We also have the ability to make dramatic changes to the world. So what he's doing here is the guy at the upper left is raising mountains out of the ground. So those mountains are all completely dynamic. They're always different. You can make them pop up anywhere, and they're spawning, some physics rocks on the side that, have real physics. And all of this data, is being shared across, all the players inside the game instance. So the last thing that I want to show off is we have a fluid simulation as well. So these dragons, when you press a certain button, they can produce water in their own special way. And what they do when they create fluid is they are hooking into a fluid simulation that is running on a single NVIDIA Titan Black GPU. So we literally have a single GPU that is being used entirely for water simulation and nothing else. So yeah, the water is fully interactive. It flows down. It eventually evaporates if it's too thin. So a question is, what happens when you take massive amounts of water and then you combine that with something like the ability to pull mountains out of a lake? And the answer to this is, of course, you get tidal waves. Let me see if we can get them. Here we go. There we go. So this is an example of where we have, two really powerful systems interacting with each other. So we have the ability to change, the level in any way that we want, and then we have that data being fed back into the water simulation, which is creating basically, gigantic tidal waves. And then, we can start pulling, because it's a multiplayer game, we can have multiple people playing together and making their own mountains and having tidal waves crash together. And we're really interested in seeing what winds up happening when we put this live. And we've got, I think we're going to have maybe eight players per instance, and we just kind of want to see the chaos that happens when people start, throwing like 5 or 6 tidal waves at each other and the results. We really want people to kind of break our simulation and see what they can come up with. So that's our R&D demo. We've also kind of been, I'm going to kind of skip over this, but we have we also have our own SDK for indie developers. So if you're just kind of a single guy and you don't necessarily have a supercomputer, we're still going to let you play games for this. So we have a system called the Shinra Community SDK. It's made essentially for making more simple 2D games. It's going to be up on GitHub. You can create your content and test it locally. When you're ready to play on our servers, you can just give us a call and we will hook you up and host your game for you. The English version is going to drop very, very shortly. I will have a link to our tech site for that. So one of the examples of the games that was made with this system is called Space Sweeper, and it is a very cute little 2D game by a crazy guy out in Japan who we love. So what's neat about Space Sweeper is it's a very simple 2D top-down game. It's a double stick shooter, but the cool part about Space Sweeper is that it supports hundreds of players. And in addition to supporting hundreds of players, it has tens of thousands of moving objects at once. So if you're making a multiplayer game, you're usually very restricted by the amount of stuff because of limits on synchronization and stuff like this. But with the community SDK, we've made it so you're able to basically just kind of throw near unlimited amounts of stuff across your game, and then share it to theoretically hundreds of players. So that'll be dropping really, really soon. So that's about it from me. If you want to sign up for the beta, if you have kids who like free games, just point your browser at beta.shinra.com. We are going to be starting the beta officially on August 11th, and if you sign up early, we will get you all the information in the client. If you are interested in how more of this stuff works, there are extremely technical articles up right now on tech.shinra.com, and that's going to be announced. We'll be announcing the first release of our SDK next week. And if you want to check in and say hi and talk about our crazy system, feel free to just check in and say hi to C. Williamson at Shinra.com, who happens to be me. So that's about it from me. So thanks so much for listening.
We're just talking loudly. Thanks for the presentation, Colin, and thanks for your presentation. Really interesting discussion of kind of what you might consider the evolution, or at least the current state of the gigabit network, as well as some of the interesting kind of architectural, as well as tactical computing things that have been done to enable some interesting things in gaming. I'm sure there's probably a couple questions in the room from a presentation. Anybody have any immediate question? Let's see. There you go.
Hi, I got a question for Ashley. So I see that Google Fiber, and this is something I've been keeping a very close eye on right from when you guys had your first demo deployments in Kansas State. But to talk about the local peering, and so at first you guys just had level 3, then you had it on XO, and I see now you guys have Hurricane. And admittedly, I haven't tested it, but even with another level 3 connection out here in Kansas City, all of my traffic is routed through Galak-Z. They're like, not even if they're not local peering through KCNAP or KCIX, some of the local peering points, there wasn't, even within the same transit provider, there's no peering out here. And has that changed yet? And are you guys going to do anything to address that?
So you're talking about things that aren't available through peering, but through level 3 is, and DFW is where you're getting routed to?
Yeah. Local, like if anybody is posting out here, small companies, there's tons of the small hosting providers and some good-sized Kansas City hosting providers, and just all the local traffic, at least last time I checked, goes out of the area before it comes back here.
So we do have a relatively, and one thing to keep in mind with Kansas is it was the first, and so we're developing new things. We actually just recently deployed a new peering architecture in Kansas, and we're going to be expanding that pretty aggressively. So hopefully that'll be changing in the near term. Because it did just change, I'm not that familiar with it because that was an engineering effort. But yes, we are putting an effort into improving peering out there. As far as definitely private peerings and peering with content providers and other service providers, yes, anyone interested should reach out to us. We have a pretty small team of peering coordinators, and we're very involved in growth, so their attention may not be on it. But if anything's brought to peering at googlefiber.net, they will definitely look into any concerns. Now, why there's no, I'd actually have to look myself. I can even look right now. Give me just a second, and I will answer one question. We just brought up some new peerings. I'm going to check and see which ones got brought up in Kansas, because that might be changing I mean, these changes are just in the last couple of weeks. Okay, so yeah, we have no full-scale Tier 1 peers there right now. So yeah, as far as peering locally, the best thing to do is to if you know of anyone that would make sense to peer with, please contact us, and you can say, hey, would you guys please consider peering with these? It's impacting my service. We'll definitely be willing to take a look at that, and definitely have them reach out to us directly if they're interested and capable of peering with us locally.
All right, thanks.
Awesome, thank you. I'm going to ask Colin the same question I asked Ashley. What's kind of changed in the last 5 years, and where do you see things going in the infrastructure as I walk over to the next question?
Okay. For gaming, do you mean in regards to gaming?
Yeah, gaming and kind of maybe network gaming in the data.
Okay, so in terms of the gaming sphere, I kind of feel that what the Xbox 360 did back in I think when it came out in 2005, it was the first console that really was connected from the very, very beginning, and it showed people essentially how to make a very, very easy to use community-based gaming service. And you see a lot of that. You saw that a lot in Steam as well. And a lot of people have kind of just really riffed off this very, very well. So this is a good question. So I think that the interesting push from the original Xbox was they made their service Xbox Live broadband only, and I think that was one of the best things that Microsoft has done for the game sphere in terms of really pushing things forward. And the other thing I think that was interesting was they put a microphone inside a headset inside every single one of their boxes. And I think that did a tremendous amount of good in terms of kind of bringing gaming into the modern console, the social gaming era. So what I see happening is I see stronger communities. for platforms. And every gaming platform that launches requires its own social network. So when you launch a game platform now, you're starting to the barrier to entry for these things has gotten very, 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 very high. There's a lot that you have to do. You need to have friends lists, video chat, voice chat, VoIP. All this stuff needs to be there from the very, very beginning. So I would say the social networkification of games and game services is the most interesting thing that's happened. And I just see things going further and further when you look at services like Twitch, where people are happy to just sit back and watch people play games as opposed to play them themselves. So I see a lot of kind of I kind of see gaming becoming a spectator sport as well. Yeah, Twitch, lots of Twitch.
Can you hear me? I'm a member of the senior set, and so my last experience with video gaming was on a nuclear attack submarine in 1977 with Ball Digital, Fire Control, and Sunrise. We were sort of ahead of the game. Now I'm trying to make sense of people my age of what you all are talking about, standpoint, how we think about the digitally immersed development. And so I'd like to hear, if you can, how many degrees of separation between the work that you guys are doing? What's your sense of is there a convergence point? Is there already a network possibility for it? Because when we talk about innovation, we talk about entrepreneurship. I think one of the things that's incredibly hard if you go to a startup weekend or Google Hackathon is to have a sense of just how deep this ocean is. So if you could, how do we connect? How does somebody like me connect these two very technical, high-tempo initiatives in a way that it can make sense to folks that, frankly, don't know very much about what you're all talking about at all?
Ash?
Sorry, it was actually a little muddy. Did you repeat the last part of the question?
I think the spirit of the question was how do you bridge kind of this capabilities of both the network and some of the applications that you're doing to a more general community? How do you kind of, are there efforts underway, and what are some of the activities that work to include a wider cross-section of the population and some of these cool initiatives that are maybe a little bit more tech forward that are accessible to the majority?
So, yeah, I mean, obviously we have our perspective on that. We'd like to be everywhere, so we're more than happy to provide service to everyone in the country, and then everyone just have gigabit. That's, I think, the ideal solution. I mean, we're certainly going to see, in terms of cable providers in 2016, you're going to see more bandwidth out of them. It's still not going to be what fiber provides, but it's going to be dramatically better because thankfully, the gigabit push by companies like Google and even AT&T and Verizon is pushing fiber to pushing the cable providers to higher bandwidths. I mean, you're going to be limited to bandwidth. DOCSIS is not a scalable platform on DOCSIS 3.0, so you're really not going to do a lot better with the current. It doesn't matter how much they increase their backbones; they're still going to be limited to tens to maximum 100 megabit.
Okay. So from the gaming side, our goal is to essentially just make everything play games. Like I said before, we want to make sure that pretty much any box that you can hook up a controller to is capable of playing just great looking games. So like eventually I would love to have the Shinra system available on something as small as a Chromecast. Something you just plug into your HDMI port and then you just hook up a controller and start playing. I realize that it's kind of it's not necessarily easy to just get a $400 console and take it home and set it up and go through that entire process. And I think that we can make things. I think we can make things easier, simpler, and most importantly, we can make it much cheaper.
Awesome.
Hey guys, you get back to the
Oh, one more question over here. Hold on.
This is for Colin. I guess my question is basically, how hard is it to take what Shinra is doing right now?
Sorry, could you say that again? You're kind of cutting out a little bit.
Basically, how do you apply Shinra to virtual reality?
Ah, yeah. This is a problem. This is a very interesting problem, and a lot of really interesting, smart people are working on a solution right now. So the issue that we have right now is the speed of light and latency. So we have an issue where we have round trip, and the round trip is very, very long when you look at what you really need for a good VR experience. I was talking to some of the Oculus guys, and they are concerned not with just the speed of getting your input to the PC and then into the headset, but they're so concerned with latency. They're actually worried about the amount of time it takes to turn on the pixels in the display to different colors. So when the threshold for what feels for what feels good for a traditional video game with double sticks, the threshold for that is maybe like 150 milliseconds feels okay. Now, if you're playing a virtual reality game that has 150 millisecond response time, you will throw up. However, so basically, there are issues with rendering, just rendering speed and the overall round trip. However, Microsoft has been doing very interesting research in regards to predictive models, where they are able to stream certain amounts of data, predict where you are going to turn your head. It's not as simple as that. I think the system is called time warping. But yeah, there's research being done into it. I eventually see cloud rendering as being a good solution for virtual reality, but it's going to be a while. The biggest problem that VR people have right now is that you need very, very high fidelity and very, very high frame rate. So the typical gaming PC or PlayStation 4 is simply not capable of driving two displays that are going into your eyeballs at a frame rate that's fast enough to trick your brain into thinking that it's real. It requires a very expensive PC. So we like to think that we'll be able to offset that calculation somehow in the cloud, and then start applying the newer techniques of how to get VR rendered remotely on the platform. So yeah, we're thinking about it, and we think it's super cool because I love VR. I think it's just a hoot.
Awesome. Well, I've gone a little bit over the time that I said that I would, so I thank you for both joining us and really engaging in an interesting conversation about the proliferation of networking and computing and algorithms in this case. So yeah, thanks again, and thanks for your kind of ability to talk a little bit in an open-ended fashion about some of these questions and really entertaining some discussion. I think there's some very interesting points there. So quick round of applause for our speakers. Thanks a lot. And Ashley, if you're willing to talk about topology and some other things or get approval, I think we'd be happy to have you back at some point in the future. No pressure, but if that was an opportunity, I think we would definitely entertain.
Yeah, I actually, I'm a little more open than my bosses, so I would be interested as well because that's kind of an easier talk for me. I'm more of a technology guy than a peering guy, so I'll talk internally and see what kind of abstractions we might be able to give.
Awesome. Well, either way, we're excited. We've been trying to get a little bit of insight into peering, topology, some of the specific deployment characteristics, and this is the first talk that I've actually seen in the years I've been trying, so thanks for that. Very good. Well, thanks for joining us, and that's kind of the remote speaker part. We'll do a little bit of cleanup Q&A on our side, and next episode of Billion Bits will be in 2 months. So thanks a lot for joining us, guys.
Yeah, thank you, guys.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah, thanks. I guess a couple of announcements, and then we got a couple of drinks, a couple more sodas, and some cleanup. So we've been doing topical talks every 2 months and happy hours every other month offset, so we do something every month. Hopefully you guys and more people can continue us to join in this conversation. And many of the talks this year have been kind of a pairing of infrastructure and application. So next time for, I guess, September now? Yeah, so probably, and we may move it around to where it's coordinated with Tech Week a little bit. There's some things going on in September where we'll try to kind of match efforts. But there's some interesting things going on. I don't want to use this microphone. Yeah, okay, I'm standing close enough, sorry. Yeah, so some interesting things for Tech Week. I think the next topic is kind of more Internet of Things and kind of highly, redundant mesh networks, really kind of more for IoT, and then maybe some embedded smart home or smart city application. So any ideas there, I'm all ears. And then we'll keep doing the happy hours. Really, all the content comes from either something we come up with or something you come up with. So if you want to, reach out to somebody or think a topic would be interested, Eric has already told me about a couple of things, so I think I owe him one or two. But everybody else, feel free to kind of volunteer a topic that you're interested in, or maybe even have some connections to. That's how we've gotten a lot of the talks, and we'll keep doing that. This doesn't happen by itself. In fact, this talk today wouldn't have happened without Aaron and Jason's help at KC Digital Drive specifically, because I kind of had to unplug in this last month or two, so thanks a lot for that. So Aaron and Jason, who had to take off but was here earlier. So KC Digital Drive has been a pretty integral part in helping us set these up. I'm Ilya Tabak, CEO of Edge Up Sports, and so we do some cool stuff as well. We'll be hearing some announcements soon about what we're up to. Think Big hosts us very graciously, has been the host for about 3 of these things now, I believe, and maybe we'll keep doing that. But thanks to them. And then actually, we didn't start with what's going on in the community, so we kind of went straight to the speakers because we already had them queued up, and so we kind of mixed the calendar up. So if anybody has any announcements, anything interesting going on, I know Midwest I/O is coming up since they just had their call for speakers. That was a great conference from what I heard last year. I think Hack Midwest just happened. Compute Midwest is coming up November-ish maybe, or September. So there's a couple things going on. Bob over at Forward KC has been pretty good at maintaining the calendar. We've embedded it. The other ask I have typically is on the Billion Bits side, we have kind of community page. And so adding other interesting tech talks, groups, things like that, if everybody can take a look and let me know if anything's missing, that'd be cool. Aaron, do you have an announcement? No, good, all right. Yeah, normally Kurt's with us videotaping, but we kind of did a live Google Hangout this time. And so this is actually gonna be on YouTube through the live Hangouts, and I'll put a link because I think it's off of my YouTube account as opposed to Billion Bits YouTube account, but we'll figure all that out. Anything I'm missing on announcements? Yeah.
Looking for a partner, that's what we did.
Yeah, so maybe a new app that looks for available apartments with fiber. We have a request. That's probably not the first request or first time that request has been made. I don't know of any, but maybe somebody will make an app and it'll make that easier.
Well, I'm pretty sure on Google Fiber's website there is a map of apartment buildings that have fiber. So if you could pull that data and cross it with apartment listings,
Problem solved.
that would be.
There you go. So maybe the fiber website.
But it doesn't give you prices.
That's a different story. But there is actually a couple apartment sites that do give you prices, so you can cross-reference those too. So it would be a two-step search. Two-step search. All right. Anything else? If nothing else, then I'd be happy to bring this to a close, finish some soda, and mingle, and call it a successful Billion Bits. Awesome. Thanks for coming.
And you can sign in, or you can just give us your email address and sign up.